Emily Clark sat inside the old attorney's office, staring at the wooden table as if it might split in half beneath her palms. The air smelled like paper and dust, and everything inside her chest felt tight. She didn't understand why her heart beat so loudly until she heard the attorney finally say the words. Her younger brother, Adam, inherited their parents' $800,000 home in New York. She inherited a broken cabin in the far woods of Alaska. For a moment, Emily didn't react. She only blinked and stared at the polished floor. Adam leaned back in his chair with a wide smile and whispered, "Makes sense, doesn't it?" The attorney coughed awkwardly and slid 2 envelopes forward. "This is what your parents left each of you," he said gently. As they stepped outside, Adam clapped her shoulder like she was a child. "You'll figure it out," he joked, then walked off humming as if he had just won something. Emily drove home in silence, replaying every moment she ever tried to prove she mattered. That night, in their tiny kitchen, her fiancé, Mark, threw the engagement ring onto the table so hard it bounced. "A cabin," he shouted. "In the middle of nowhere? Are you serious?" She tried to explain, but he talked over her. "I can't build a future with someone who has nothing to offer," he yelled. The walls shook when he slammed the door and left. Emily stood frozen, staring at the ring. She whispered to herself, "Maybe I really don't matter." But deep inside, something small, quiet, and painfully stubborn refused to die. Emily grew up believing that silence was safety. She learned early that keeping still, keeping quiet, keeping calm, made life easier for everyone around her. Her family never said she was less important, but it always felt that way. Adam, ever since he was little, filled every room like sunlight. Loud, confident, charming. Teachers adored him. Uncles bragged about him. Neighbors asked for him by name. Emily was the quiet child who read books in corners and stayed invisible. She remembered once, at 13, bringing home an award for an essay she wrote. She placed the paper on the dinner table during supper. Her father glanced at it for half a second and then turned excitedly to Adam. "Son, are you ready for your tournament this weekend?" Emily sat silently, her fork paused in the air. Her mother touched her hand under the table and whispered, "I'm proud of you." Emily forced a smile even though it wasn't enough. Years passed like that. Adam always received the newest shoes, the nicest gifts, the loudest praise. Emily learned to whisper dreams, never speak them loudly. As she grew older, she worked quietly and steadily. She built a calm professional life, analyzing numbers, learning patterns, working late nights that nobody saw. People said she was reliable. Nobody said she was extraordinary. She never complained. She simply accepted it. But secretly, sometimes late at night, she wished someone would look at her the way they looked at Adam. As if she mattered simply by existing. When Mark first entered Emily's life, he admired her softness. He told her she had a peaceful presence unlike anyone he knew. He said he loved her quiet loyalty, her kindness, her patience. She believed him. She trusted him. But slowly, admiration transformed into disappointment. Mark began comparing her to Adam in small ways. "Your brother is doing so well," he'd say while scrolling through social media. "You should push yourself a bit harder, don't you think?" Emily always laughed it off because she had been trained to swallow pain before it reached the surface. "I'm doing my best," she would say gently. Mark would respond, "I know, but your best is just different." At dinner with friends, Mark would joke that Emily was a simple girl. Everyone laughed. Emily laughed too, but the joke stung in places she couldn't describe. She tried harder to please him, waking up earlier, working later, dressing differently, but it was never enough. Mark grew louder, sharper, more restless, especially after Adam started earning more money. "You're too comfortable," Mark snapped one night. "You're almost 30, Emily. Do you even have a plan?" The words sliced deep, not because they were loud, but because she feared they were true. She didn't know that she was slowly shrinking to fit into a life that did not belong to her. The night the will was read was the same night Emily broke apart. She sat alone in the dark kitchen holding her phone, staring at messages Adam sent. Photos of the house, the yard, the giant windows. "Look at this place," he wrote. Mom and Dad knew who the real winner was. When the lock on the apartment door turned, Emily wiped her eyes quickly, hoping Mark wouldn't see she had been crying. But Mark marched inside already furious. "Your brother told me everything," he shouted. Emily tried to speak, but nothing came out. Mark began pacing aggressively. "How could you let this happen? Everyone knows how unfair it looks for us. Him with a mansion and you with, what? That's humiliating. Emily whispered, it's not a shack. Mark laughed loudly in disbelief. Emily, listen to yourself, he snapped. Your parents were practical. They gave the valuable property to the successful child. That's obvious. She stared at him stunned. Successful child, she repeated quietly. Mark shook his head and muttered, don't be naive. Then the words that shattered the last part of her fell from his mouth. I refuse to marry someone who brings nothing to the table. He grabbed his coat, looked her dead in the eyes and said, you're pathetic. The door slammed. Silence swallowed everything. Emily sat on the cold kitchen floor for what felt like hours. She stared at the ring lying near the chair leg, glinting in the weak light. She didn't touch it. Couldn't. She felt like her entire life had collapsed in one night. Her parents' inheritance, Adam's smugness, Mark's words all piled on top of her chest like stones too heavy to move. She curled her knees against her chest and cried, not the quiet tears she learned to hide, but deep, painful sobs that came from years of being overlooked. When the tears finally faded, she wiped her face with trembling hands. She whispered to herself, I can't stay here. Her voice sounded strange, like it belonged to someone else. She pulled herself up slowly, walked to the bedroom and opened her laptop. She closed Mark's contact without hesitating. Then she opened a travel site. Her breath shook as she typed one word, Alaska. She didn't know what she was chasing, answers, closure, escape, but she knew she needed distance. She needed air. She needed the silence of somewhere far away. She booked a one-way flight. No return date. No plan. Early the next morning she packed a single suitcase. Before leaving she placed the engagement ring in a small dish on the kitchen counter. No note. No message. When she closed the apartment door behind her, it didn't feel like an ending. It felt like the smallest beginning. Emily landed in Alaska late in the afternoon, and the cold felt like a physical force pushing against her body. The small regional airport looked nothing like the busy New York terminals she knew. A kind older man who introduced himself as Peter picked her up with an old pickup truck. Cabin's about an hour from here, he said as he placed her luggage in the back. Emily sat quietly in the passenger seat, staring at the snow-covered mountains through the windshield. Peter glanced at her and smiled softly. You look like someone starting something new, he observed. Emily blinked, surprised by the comment. Maybe I am, she said quietly. The road stretched endlessly, winding between clusters of tall trees and frozen lakes. When Peter finally stopped, he pointed toward the woods. Your place is that way, he said gently. You'll need to walk the rest. Emily nodded nervously. She thanked him and stepped out, her boots crunching deep into the snow. The trees towered over her as she followed a small, faded trail. Her breath formed white clouds in the air. After a long walk, she saw the cabin. It looked abandoned, broken windows, sagging roof, leaning walls. Emily stood still, snowflakes settling on her hair. This is it, she whispered to herself. It felt symbolic, like every forgotten part of her life had taken the shape of this building. But she stepped forward anyway. The front door resisted her push like it had been frozen shut for years. When it finally gave way, the air inside was colder than outside. Emily wrapped her coat tighter and stepped in slowly. The wooden floor creaked beneath her feet, and a thin layer of snow covered everything near the broken window. A collapsed chair lay in the corner and shelves full of dust leaned dangerously. For a moment Emily felt overwhelmed. She whispered, "What am I doing here?" The silence gave no answer. She put her suitcase down and sat on the cold floor. The weight in her chest grew heavier, not from regret but from exhaustion. She stared out the broken window at the trees. "Why did they leave me this?" she asked aloud, as if her parents might suddenly walk in and explain everything. After a long pause she stood again. "All right," she exhaled softly. "Let's start somewhere." She found the broom leaning against a wall. She began sweeping, clearing small spaces little by little, working without thinking, without planning, without stopping. After an hour, sweat formed under her coat despite the cold. She swept again, cleaned again until her muscles ached. There was no pride in the work, only purpose. Something deep inside her, something quiet and wounded, began to breathe again. As Emily swept the center of the room, the broom hit something solid beneath the old rug. It startled her. She knelt and pulled the rug back, coughing as dust rose into the air. Beneath it lay a wooden hatch with a small rusted iron ring. He stared at it frozen. "What is this?" she whispered. Her heartbeat grew louder, echoing inside her ears. She hesitated. Her first instinct was to walk away. The second was stronger. She pulled the iron ring with both hands, and the hatch groaned open like a voice awakened from sleep. A narrow staircase stretched into the dark below. Emily swallowed hard. She grabbed her flashlight and descended cautiously. Each old wooden step complained beneath her weight. When she reached the bottom, she gasped. Wooden crates, dozens of them, were stacked neatly against the walls. In the far corner sat a large metal trunk. Emily approached a crate nervously and pried it open. Her breath stopped as gold coins spilled into view. She picked one up. It was heavy. She whispered, trembling, "This can't be real." She opened another crate. Old jewelry, pearl necklaces, emerald brooches, silver bars. The basement glowed faintly under her shaking flashlight beam. Emily clutched her chest. Her knees felt weak. Her parents had left her more than anyone could imagine. Emily moved toward the trunk slowly, afraid the moment would evaporate. She lifted the lid and found stacks of old business ledgers and land agreements. Her family's name was written everywhere. Timber rights, mineral contracts, old ownership documents. She reached deeper and found an envelope with her name on the front. Her hands shook as she opened it. Inside was a handwritten letter. Her mother's handwriting. Emily froze and her eyes filled instantly. The words were simple but heavy. "We trust you. We always trusted you. This inheritance is not for show. It is for legacy. It belongs with the one who will protect it." Emily pressed the page to her heart, tears falling silently. She whispered, "Mom, why didn't you tell me?" The answer wasn't in the letter, but she understood. Adam needed applause. She needed purpose. And her parents knew the difference. Emily sat on the cold basement floor, surrounded by crates of unimaginable value, holding the only words she had ever truly needed. For the first time in her life, she felt seen. Emily climbed back up the stairs slowly, wiping her face. The cabin looked different now, not like a punishment but like a key. She sat on the edge of a broken step and stared at the open hatch. "They believed in me," she whispered, letting the truth settle like heat in her chest. She spent the next 2 days cataloging every crate, every item, every document, carefully writing everything down in a notebook she brought from home. She worked quietly but intensely. She reached out to experts under a false name to verify certain items. The answers she received confirmed everything was real. Very real. She didn't rush. She didn't panic. She didn't tell anyone. Not Adam. Not Mark. Not a single person. For the first time, she wasn't trying to prove herself to anyone. She was planning something silently, patiently, on her own terms. When Adam called bragging about his mansion, she let the phone ring. When Mark texted that he wanted to talk, she deleted the message. Emily packed the letter carefully and closed the cabin door behind her. She stared out at the white landscape with steady breath. This wasn't the end of her story. It had barely begun. Emily returned to New York with a calmness she did not recognize in herself. When the taxi pulled in front of her apartment, she stood outside for a long moment before going in. The silence inside the place felt familiar but not frightening anymore. She walked around slowly, collecting small things she wanted to keep. Her favorite books. A sweater her mother bought years ago. Photographs she once hid away because she felt they didn't matter to anyone. When Mark suddenly appeared in the doorway, she did not look surprised. He stared at her with irritation first, then confusion. "You left just like that?" he demanded. Emily continued folding her clothes. "Yes," she answered. He scoffed. "You think disappearing makes you stronger?" Emily turned to look at him calmly. "It didn't make me stronger," she said. "It saved me." He stared at her, unsure how to respond. He stepped forward. "Let's talk," he insisted. Emily shook her head gently. "There's nothing left to talk about." Mark frowned. "Emily, don't be ridiculous." She stepped past him and opened the door. "Goodbye, Mark." Her voice was steady. He called after her as she left the apartment forever. She didn't look back. Emily rented a small studio on the quiet side of town. He built new routines. Calm routines. She woke early each morning, brewed tea, and sat by the window while the sun rose between buildings. Some mornings she reread her mother's letter. Other mornings she planned carefully in her notebook, mapping decisions step by step. She contacted experts, historians, appraisers slowly, quietly, professionally. She signed legal papers under careful supervision. The resource documents, contracts, and mineral rights became clearer every week. Their value was astonishing. She learned that her inheritance wasn't just gold. It was history. Land worth millions. Untouched resources. Contracts older than she imagined. She hired a lawyer with calm confidence. He asked where she got the documents. She only answered, "My parents trusted me." He nodded, understanding it was not curiosity he was being paid for but protection. Emily walked everywhere with quiet purpose. She did not brag. She did not announce. She did not share details with a single soul. For the first time her life was not about being seen. It was about building. Months passed. Adam visited her one afternoon unannounced. He sat across from her with a crooked smile, spinning the keys to the mansion in his hand. "You should congratulate me," he said proudly. Emily nodded politely. "Congratulations." Adam laughed at her tone. "You sound jealous," he teased. Emily smiled faintly. "I'm not." Adam leaned forward. "So what are you doing with your cabin?" Emily folded her hands. "Restoring it," she answered simply. He laughed loudly. "Restoring a pile of wood? Why?" Emily met his eyes. "Because it matters," she said softly. Adam stared at her in confusion, like she was speaking a different language. "Well," he muttered, standing up, "at least one of us got something useful." He left, shaking his head. Emily closed the door gently behind him and exhaled. She wasn't angry. She wasn't hurt. For the first time ever, Adam's words did not shape her worth. The restoration began quietly. Emily traveled back and forth to Alaska, meeting with workers, planners, builders. They treated her with respect, not because they knew her financial background, but because she spoke with clarity and fairness. "This building can live again," an architect told her with excitement after reviewing the project. Emily nodded. "It deserves to." She supervised decisions, listened carefully, and learned. As months went on, the cabin began to transform. New wood, strong beams, reinforced foundation. The basement remained untouched, but secured. One morning as the crew worked, the foreman pulled Emily aside. "This land," he said with wonder, "could be something remarkable." Emily nodded slowly. "It already is." She sat outside the cabin that evening, wrapped in a blanket, watching snow settle gently around her. She whispered to the silence, "Thank you, Mom." The silence finally felt like an answer. By autumn, the cabin was no longer a broken structure. It was reborn. Emily walked through each room slowly, running her hand along the smooth wooden walls. The windows were wide and clear. The floors strong. The fireplace restored. She stood in the middle of the living room, the same place she once wept and whispered, "This is what I'm worth." Now she whispered something different. "This is where I begin." That evening she read through the final appraisal reports. The mineral rights alone were worth more than the value of Adam's house 10 times over. She smiled softly, not with triumph but gratitude. She realized she never wanted a mansion. She wanted meaning. She wanted purpose. And she had found it. Emily invited Adam months later, not to brag but to honor their parents. He walked into the cabin expecting ruins. He froze instead. What is this?" he stammered. Emily gestured around the room calmly. "This is the cabin they left me." Adam swallowed hard, his voice cracking. "Why did they give me the house?" Emily held up the letter gently. "Because you needed applause," she answered. Adam stared at her, confused. "And you didn't?" Emily smiled softly. "I needed responsibility." He looked down, suddenly embarrassed. He realized he had misunderstood everything. She didn't rub it in. She didn't lecture him. She simply let him see the truth for himself. Adam sat on the cabin steps, stunned. "So, you got the better deal," he admitted quietly. Emily shook her head. "It's not a deal," she said gently. "It's a duty." Adam breathed out slowly. "You deserve it," he murmured. Emily smiled kindly because forgiveness came easily when you no longer needed validation. She placed the letter beside him. "Read this," she whispered. Adam read every word slowly, carefully, silently. When he finished, he looked up at her with tears in his eyes. They trusted you, he said. Emily nodded. And now I trust myself. Years later, the cabin became a protected historical site, a center for environmental preservation, and a refuge for researchers and historians. Emily oversaw every detail not as someone proving herself, but as someone honoring something greater. Adam visited often, sometimes only to sit beside her in silence. Their relationship healed not because the past disappeared, but because Emily no longer lived inside it. Emily stood outside the cabin one quiet evening, watching the sun dip behind the trees. Her new life felt grounded. Steady. Whole. She whispered softly to the cold air, "Mom, I did it right." And she walked back inside not as the forgotten child, not as someone overlooked, not as the quiet one but as a woman who finally understood her value. Her story didn't end in the cold kitchen or in the attorney's office, or on the floor holding broken dreams. It began in a forgotten cabin in Alaska where she discovered herself. Moral lesson. True worth is not determined by what others give you, but by what you choose to build with what life hands you. Thanks you for watching, and please remember to tell us where you are watching from today. Hit the like button, comment and subscribe to this channel for more.